My parents tried to manipulate me for financial gain, so I let them and gave them more than they bargained for. Now, my mother is at my doorstep, demanding money I don't have, not knowing. She has just made the biggest mistake of her life. When I was 6 years old, I got up at 5 a.m. one Saturday and cleaned the entire house before my parents woke up, because I wanted just one thing, for them to be proud of me and tell me that they loved me. But they just looked blankly at me, turned on the TV, and told me to go change because I reek of sweat. This is a perfect summary of my relationship with my parents. I did everything for them to love me. I'd even go as far as mowing lawns on weekends, just to take us out for family dinner every Sunday. And yet, they barely even acknowledged me. I can't recall a single time either of them told me, "I love you." But by far, the biggest shock came when I, now 23, was enrolling in college 5 years ago. My parents told me they wanted me to go college out of state so I could finally be out of their lives. I felt incredibly devastated, so much so that I teared up in front of them and was told by my dad to man up and stop crying. I packed my bags and moved to my friend's place for the summer that night. But despite feeling crushed, I felt a small sense of happiness, because moving away was my first step towards healing. Fast forward to last May when I was graduating. I was in a much better place mentally, having gone from the shy, anxious, depressed, people-pleasing teenager to a much more confident, self-assured young man who knew his own worth. But then, my parents shocked me one last time, but this time, it was in a positive light. They reached out to me telling me they were proud of me and asked if they could attend my college graduation. I actually teared up when I read that. I felt my inner child being healed. We hadn't even spoken in 2 years, but it still felt every bit as surreal and amazing. I didn't even consider the possibility of this being a power play on their part. I immediately replied yes, saying I'd love nothing more than for them to be there. I didn't realize at the time, but my graduation day was the calm before the storm. My parents applauded as I received my diploma, and I even teared up during my speech because seeing them there meant so much. Then, 4 days after my graduation, I got an email from my mom. I felt my heart race, genuinely thinking they were attempting to rebuild the relationship. But instead, the email was a receipt, naming every expense they made to attend my graduation. Flight tickets, 5 nights at a luxury hotel, breakfast, wine, Uber to dinner, etc. They demanded I cover their entire trip, the entire $3,235. There wasn't anything else in the letter. No congratulations, great seeing you, anything, nothing. I stared at my screen like a deer in headlights. My stomach twisted, and I felt like I wanted to puke. My roommate found me red in the face, my fist angrily banging the table, seconds away from screaming. I felt so many emotions at once. Money wasn't even the issue. I had the money. The issue was that I had specifically asked my parents if they wanted me to pay for the tickets in the first place, and they refused. At first, I wanted to blame myself for this, just like when I was a kid. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. The very next day, after an impromptu session with my therapist, I made a decision. I wrote them a check for the exact amount, even giving them $1 extra as a thank you for attending. But that's not all I did. I also sent them a message. In the message, I let everything out, reminding them how I used to cry watching TV, seeing other kids receive love from their parents, while my own ignored me. How I used to cry myself to sleep because of how they neglected me. How I paid my dad's car off when I was 16 to get them to appreciate me. How I endured their emotional abuse. That's what I called it. Emotional abuse. I finished off the letter by lying to them. I lied that in the past couple of years, I had become a self-made millionaire, and that before receiving their email, I was planning on buying them a holiday, for just the two of them, as my way of saying, thank you for coming. But now, not only were they not getting the holiday, they were also not getting the house I planned to buy for them when my dad retires in a few years. I even included a bunch of fancy crypto jargon to sell them that I was a millionaire, and hit send. After sending the check and the message, I blocked them both. I honestly didn't know what to expect, but at first, I got silence. Radio silence. But then, of course, a few days later, the messages started. My parents, aunts, uncles, everyone bombarding me, calling me selfish, an a-hole, a disgrace. But there was one particular message that stuck it out. It was from my mom. "We're flying over to your house now. You better have answers prepared." I started panicking. I checked the flight schedules, and there was indeed a flight from their city arriving in 3 hours. I called Tyler frantically to warn him about my parents' impending visit, but my phone died right as the call connected. Just my luck. I grabbed my charger and ran to my car, getting stuck in afternoon rush hour traffic. Every red light felt like torture as my anxiety kept building. I kept thinking about what they might do, what they might say, how I could possibly handle facing them again. When I finally got to our apartment, I found my worst fears had come true. My parents were already sitting in our living room. Tyler was there looking uncomfortable, like he'd been trapped in an awkward conversation for too long. The weird thing was, my parents didn't look angry. They looked almost pleasant. That scared me more than if they'd been yelling. "There he is," my mom said, standing up to hug me. I stood stiffly as she wrapped her arms around me. "We've been having such a nice chat with Tyler." Tyler shot me a look that clearly said, "Help me." "What are you doing here?" I asked. stepping back from my mom's hug. "Sweetie, there's been a huge misunderstanding about the graduation expenses," my mom said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We never meant for you to think we were charging you. It was just to show you how much we spent to be there for your special day." As she talked, I noticed my dad wasn't looking at me. He was subtly angling his phone around the apartment, taking pictures. I watched him snap shots of our living room, the kitchen beyond, even zooming in on some mail on the counter. "Dad, are you taking pictures of our apartment?" I interrupted my mom's monologue. "What? No, just checking emails," he said, quickly pocketing his phone. Tyler stood up. "I just remembered I need to meet some friends. Text me when you're done here," he said, giving me a meaningful look before grabbing his jacket and heading out. As soon as the door closed behind Tyler, my parents' demeanor changed. My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've caused quite a stir in the family with your lies," he said. "Everyone thinks you're some kind of millionaire who's refusing to help his parents. You could fix this," my mom added. "If you just helped us out financially, we could tell everyone it was a misunderstanding." That's when it clicked. This wasn't about the graduation bill at all. This was about the lie I'd told about being wealthy. They actually believed it. "I'm not a millionaire," I said flatly. "I made that up because I was hurt by the bill you sent me." My dad snorted. "Right. We've seen your social media, the restaurants, the weekend trips. You're doing very well for yourself and not sharing with family." They'd been monitoring my social media all this time. Those posts were mostly from events paid for by my friends or cheap day trips where we split gas money. But from the outside, I guess it could look like a more lavish lifestyle. "Look," my dad said, his voice softening into what I recognized as his manipulation tone. "Let's start fresh. We're thinking a small loan of $50,000 for our retirement fund. That's nothing for someone in your position." I just stared at them. "I'm not giving you money. I don't have money to give. And even if I did, the answer would still be no." My mom's face changed instantly. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by the cold look I knew all too well from childhood. "We can make things very difficult for you," she said. "Your employer might be interested to hear about your trouble with the law as a teenager." "I never had trouble with the law," I said, confused. "They don't know that," my dad replied with a smirk. I remembered what my therapist had told me about documenting interactions with them. I touched the button on my smartwatch to start recording. "I'm recording this conversation," I said calmly. "If you're threatening to lie to my employer, I'd like to have that on record." Their expressions changed faster than flipping a switch. Suddenly, they were concerned parents again, just trying to reconnect with their son. My dad stood up, making excuses about needing to get back to their hotel. As they headed toward the door, I noticed my dad casually pick up my spare house key from the entry table. "Put that back," I said firmly. He acted surprised, as if he'd picked it up by accident, and returned the key. They were almost out the door when my mom suddenly clutched at her chest and collapsed against the wall. "My heart," she gasped. "I think I'm having a heart attack." I panicked and called 911 immediately. The operator asked me questions about my mom's condition while I watched her writhing on the floor. My dad knelt beside her, looking genuinely worried, which made me second-guess myself. What if she was actually having a heart attack? What if my suspicion and coldness toward them had caused this? The guilt hit me hard, even as I tried to stay logical. The paramedics arrived within minutes. 2 EMTs rushed in with their equipment while I stood back, heart racing. They checked her vitals, asked her questions, and did a quick examination. One of them pulled me aside, while the other continued checking my mom. "Has she had heart problems before?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "We're not close." The paramedic nodded without judgment and returned to my mom. After a few more minutes of examination, they helped her sit up. The female EMT explained that my mom's vitals were normal and that this appeared to be an anxiety attack, not a heart issue. She suggested my mom follow up with her doctor, but didn't think emergency care was necessary. Like magic, my mom's condition improved dramatically once she realized her performance wasn't working. She refused to go to the hospital, saying she felt better already. The paramedics left after having her sign a form, and I was once again alone with my parents. "You need to leave," I said firmly, standing by the door. "Now." My dad helped my mom up, giving me a look that chilled me to the bone. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Family takes care of family. Remember that?" I didn't respond, just held the door open until they walked through it. Then I shut it, locked it, and slid down to the floor with my back against it. I was shaking. I called Tyler and gave him a quick update, telling him it was safe to come home. While I waited for him, I ordered new locks online for same-day installation. When Tyler got back, he helped me install the new locks and even bought a basic security camera for our front door. We set it up together, both of us jumpy at every noise from the hallway. "Dude, your parents are something else," Tyler said, as we tested the camera's motion alerts on our phones. "Your mom had me convinced I was gay and trying to corrupt you or something. They kept asking weird questions about our relationship." I groaned. "Yeah, that sounds like them. Thanks for dealing with them until I got here." "No problem. But seriously, are you okay? This is messed up." Before I could answer, my phone pinged with a notification from my bank about unusual activity. My heart sank as I quickly logged into my account. Someone had attempted to access it using my personal information. The attempt had been flagged because it came from a different state, my parents' home state. "They're trying to get into my bank account," I said, showing Tyler my phone. Tyler looked horrified. Can they do that? They know my social security number, my birthday, probably my first pet's name, and all the other security questions, I said, feeling sick. They're my parents. I spent the next hour on the phone with my bank, freezing all my accounts and setting up additional security measures. I also froze my credit with all 3 major bureaus just to be safe. While I was doing this, my phone rang with a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered and put it on speaker so Tyler could hear. It was my dad. We know people who can make problems for you, he said without preamble. Computer people who can access things. You should think about that before you keep refusing to help your family. I hung up without responding, but saved the voicemail. The next morning, I took the recording to the police station and filed a report for attempted identity theft and harassment. The officer who took my report was sympathetic, but not particularly hopeful. Family disputes are complicated, he said. Without concrete proof they were the ones who attempted to access your account, there's not much we can do besides take the report. I left feeling frustrated, but at least I had documentation started. When I got home and checked the mail, I found several credit card applications I hadn't requested. This confirmed my suspicions. My parents had stolen mail or personal documents during their brief visit to our apartment, but I couldn't figure out how they'd managed it with our new locks and security camera. Later, I discovered they had befriended our building's maintenance supervisor, who had let them in when we weren't home. I added this to my growing file of evidence. The next day at work, I spoke with building security, warning them about potential troublemakers who might claim to be my parents. I showed them photos and asked to be notified if these people appeared. The security guards seemed to take it seriously, making notes in their system. Despite my precautions, my mother managed to show up at my workplace the very next afternoon. The receptionist called, saying my mother was in the lobby with important family documents that I needed to sign. I asked the receptionist to tell her I wasn't available. 10 minutes later, my supervisor came to my desk. "Everything okay with your family?" she asked. "Your mother seems pretty insistent about seeing you." I had to give my supervisor a quick, sanitized version of the situation. She seemed understanding at first, but I could tell she was concerned about personal drama affecting the workplace. My concern proved valid when the following day, anonymous emails arrived in the company's general inbox with embarrassing photos of me from high school, including one where I was clearly drunk at a party. The subject line read, "Your employee's character." I was called into an uncomfortable meeting with HR, where I had to explain I was being harassed by my estranged parents. "We understand personal difficulties," the HR representative said carefully, "but we need to maintain professional boundaries. Perhaps you should resolve these family issues outside of work hours." I left the meeting feeling humiliated and angry. My parents were systematically trying to destroy the life I'd built. When I told Tyler about the workplace incident, he immediately suggested we install more security cameras around our apartment. "We need to have evidence if they try anything else," he said. We made plans to buy the equipment that weekend, but before we could, we returned home from work to find something unsettling. Nothing was missing, but things weren't quite right. My laptop had been moved slightly. A drawer in the kitchen wasn't fully closed. The bathroom towels were folded differently. "Someone's been in here," Tyler said, voicing what we both were thinking. We called the police again. The responding officers took the report, but said there was no sign of forced entry and nothing was stolen, so there wasn't much they could do. They suggested we check with building management about who might have access to our apartment. That night, neither of us felt safe staying there, so we crashed at our friend Alex's place. The next morning, I received a certified letter from an attorney claiming my parents had financially supported my education and were demanding repayment of $150,000. The letter listed alleged expenses including tuition, housing, food, and even emotional support that apparently had a dollar value attached. I laughed bitterly as I showed the letter to Tyler. "I paid for college with scholarships and loans. They didn't give me a dime. Do you have proof of that?" Tyler asked. Fortunately, I did. I'd kept detailed records of all my scholarships and student loans, specifically because I'd been afraid my parents might try to take credit for my education someday. I spent the evening organizing all my financial documentation, ready to disprove their claims. My therapist suggested I have my own attorney send a formal cease and desist letter. I used most of my next paycheck to hire a lawyer who specialized in harassment cases. She drafted a strongly worded letter demanding my parents stop all contact and threatened legal consequences if they continued. I thought the attorney's letter might finally get through to them. Instead, it escalated things further. My parents began contacting my friends and even former classmates from college. They painted themselves as concerned parents, trying to help their mentally unstable son, who was pushing away his loving family. Several of my less close friends started reaching out, asking if I was okay, and suggesting I should reconcile with my parents. "They seem to really care about you," one said. "Everyone has family issues sometimes." I was losing the narrative. People who didn't know the full story were starting to see me as the villain. A group of these friends even organized what they called a mediation dinner, which was really just an intervention where they tried to convince me to reconnect with my loving parents. "You don't understand," I tried explaining. "They're not who they pretend to be in public. They raised you, someone argued. They put a roof over your head. You owe them some respect. I was about to give up when Tyler stood and addressed the group. None of you lived in that house growing up. None of you know what he went through. And none of you were there when his parents broke into our apartment last week. The room fell silent. Tyler pulled out his phone and showed them the security camera footage we'd retrieved from building management. It clearly showed my parents speaking with the maintenance supervisor, who then let them into our apartment. My mother was smiling and chatting while my father looked impatient to get inside. Seeing the actual evidence, most of my friends realized they'd been manipulated. They apologized for the intervention and promised to block my parents if they reached out again. The friend who had organized it looked especially ashamed. "I'm sorry," he said. "My parents are great, so I just assumed I should have trusted you." With my immediate social circle back on my side, I felt stronger. I focused on documenting every single contact attempt and strange occurrence. My parents switched tactics again, now spreading rumors in my hometown that I was mentally unstable. Distant relatives and family friends started calling to check if I was getting help and taking my medication I had never been prescribed. The constant stress was wearing me down. After discussing it with Tyler and my therapist, I decided to temporarily deactivate all my social media accounts. This would cut off one way my parents gathered information about me, but it also isolated me from my support network. Tyler suggested a solution. He created dummy accounts to monitor what my parents were posting without them knowing we could see it. This turned out to be crucial. Through one of these monitoring accounts, we discovered my parents were planning a surprise visit with several extended family members to help me. They had posted about intervention strategies and shared my address with relatives I barely knew. "They're planning to ambush you with the whole family," Tyler warned, showing me the posts. This Saturday. Thankfully, our apartment building required visitor approval. I immediately contacted building management, explaining the situation and providing the restraining order documentation. They assured me that no one would be allowed up without my explicit approval. When Saturday came, I was a nervous wreck. Around noon, I received a call from the front desk. "Sir, there are 5 people here claiming to be your family. They're saying it's an emergency." "It's not an emergency," I replied. "Please don't let them up. They're violating a restraining order by being there." The security guard handled it professionally, refusing to let them up without my approval. According to the follow-up call I received, my parents and 3 other relatives had created quite a scene in the lobby, yelling about family rights and threatening to call the police themselves. Security had recorded the entire incident on their cameras, giving me more evidence of harassment. Later that evening, my Uncle Thomas called. He had been part of the group earlier but seemed more reasonable than the others. "Look, I don't know exactly what's going on between you and your parents," he said, "but I care about you, kid. Can we meet somewhere private to talk? Just you and me?" I was wary, but also curious. Thomas had always been the most normal of my relatives. He'd occasionally slipped me $20 at family gatherings when I was a kid, telling me to buy something fun. I cautiously agreed to meet him at a cafe near my workplace the following afternoon. "Just you," I emphasized. "If anyone else shows up, I'm leaving immediately." "I understand," he said. "Just us." I arrived at the cafe early and chose a table with a clear view of the entrance and exit. I ordered a coffee and waited nervously, checking my phone every few minutes. Thomas arrived right on time, alone as promised. He ordered a coffee and sat across from me, looking uncomfortable. "So," he started, "your parents are telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown. And you believed them?" I asked. He shrugged. "I figured there were 2 sides to the story. That's why I'm here." As Thomas talked, I happened to glance out the window. Parked across the street was a familiar car, my parents' rental. I could see both of them sitting inside, watching the cafe. My heart started racing. "They're outside," I said, cutting Thomas off mid-sentence. "In the car across the street." Thomas looked genuinely surprised and turned to look. I swear I didn't know they would follow me. I told them I was running errands. Whether he was telling the truth or not didn't matter. I couldn't trust anyone in my family anymore. I stood up, threw some cash on the table for the coffees, and headed for the back exit. "I'm sorry," I heard Thomas call after me, but I didn't look back. I texted Tyler immediately, asking him to meet me at home. As I took a circuitous route back to our apartment, checking frequently to make sure I wasn't being followed, I felt a crushing realization. I couldn't trust anyone in my family, not even the ones who seemed reasonable. They were all potential tools for my parents to get to me. When I got home, Tyler was already there. I told him about what happened with Thomas and seeing my parents waiting outside. "This is getting seriously creepy," Tyler said. "They're basically stalking you at this point." "I know," I replied, pacing our living room. "And I don't know how to make it stop. The restraining order isn't doing anything. The police reports aren't doing anything. Nothing is working." Tyler thought for a moment. "What about your grandmother? Have you talked to her about any of this?" "My grandmother. I hadn't even considered reaching out to her. She lived in another state and had always been somewhat distant from the family drama. My mom always claimed she was difficult, which was odd considering how warm and understanding she'd always been with me during our limited interactions. But there was some tension between them. They rarely spoke, and my mother would roll her eyes whenever grandmother was mentioned. I later learned this was because my grandmother saw through my mother's manipulations and called her out on them. "That's actually not a bad idea," I said slowly. "She's always been pretty straight shooting." I found my grandmother's number and called her that evening. She sounded surprised to hear from me, but not displeased. Well, this is unexpected, she said. Last I heard you were having some sort of breakdown. Let me guess, I said. Mom and Dad told you that? They did indeed, she confirmed. I had my doubts. You always seemed like the most level-headed one in the family. Over the next hour, I gave my grandmother the whole story, starting from childhood and ending with the cafe incident that day. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small noises of acknowledgement. When I finished, there was a long silence. Your mother was always troubled, she finally said, and your father enables her worst tendencies. I tried to intervene when you were young, but they cut me off, said I was interfering. A memory suddenly surfaced. My grandmother visiting when I was about 8, getting into a heated argument with my parents, and then not seeing her again for years. I had forgotten all about it. So you believe me? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Of course I believe you, she said firmly, and I think I know what this is really about. What do you mean? Have they mentioned money recently? Asked for loans or financial help? She asked. Yes, actually. How did you know? My grandmother sighed. Because they've been calling me too, asking for advances on their inheritance. When I refused, they started suggesting I was becoming senile and might need help managing my affairs. I felt sick. That's exactly what they're doing to me. They've convinced themselves I'm secretly wealthy. No, it's worse than that, my grandmother said. They know exactly what they're doing. They've been doing it for years to different family members. Your grandfather and I eventually had to cut them off completely from any financial support. We talked for another hour, comparing notes on their manipulation tactics. It was validating to hear that someone else in the family saw through them, but also devastating to realize how deep and calculated their behavior was. I want you to come visit me, my grandmother said before we hung up. Next month. We have a lot to discuss, and I think you'll be safer away from them for a while. I agreed, feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. When I told Tyler about the conversation, he was enthusiastic about me visiting my grandmother. It'll be good for you to get away, he said, and it sounds like she really gets it. The next few weeks were relatively quiet. No dramatic appearances from my parents, no new financial attacks. It felt like the calm before a storm, but I tried to enjoy the peace while it lasted. I focused on work, spent time with friends who supported me, and continued therapy sessions. Then, 2 days before I was scheduled to fly out to visit my grandmother, I received a plain white envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of me entering my therapist's office, clearly taken from a parked car across the street. On the back was written, "We know everything." I showed the photo to Tyler, who looked as disturbed as I felt. "That's really creepy," he said, turning the photo over in his hands. "You need to tell your therapist about this." I called my therapist immediately and arranged an emergency session for that afternoon. I brought the photograph with me, explaining how I'd received it and what had been happening. My therapist examined the photo carefully. "This crosses a line into potentially dangerous behavior," she said. "I'm concerned about your safety." "What should I do?" I asked. "The police won't do anything without direct threats. Document everything, as you've been doing," she advised. "But also consider temporarily relocating somewhere your parents wouldn't know about. Your trip to visit your grandmother is good timing." She also suggested I check my car and phone for tracking devices or spyware. Tyler helped me go through my car that evening, checking underneath and in wheel wells for any unusual devices. We didn't find anything, but the experience left me feeling paranoid and exposed. The next day at work, I was called into my boss's office. She looked uncomfortable as I sat down. "We received some concerning information about you," she began, sliding a folder across her desk. Inside was a printout of what looked like a police report with my name on it, detailing a DUI arrest and a charge of assaulting an officer. The date listed was during my sophomore year of college. "This never happened," I said immediately. "This is fabricated. I've never been arrested." My boss looked relieved. "I hope that was the case. It didn't seem like you." The email came from an anonymous account, which seemed suspicious. I explained the situation with my parents briefly, emphasizing that they were actively trying to damage my reputation. My boss was understanding but concerned. "If you need time off to deal with this, just let me know," she said, "and I'll alert IT to block future emails from unknown senders." I thanked her and went back to my desk, feeling shaken. My parents were escalating their attacks, targeting my career now. I called my lawyer and updated her on the latest developments. She agreed that we had enough for a harassment case, but warned me it would mean prolonged contact with my parents through the legal system. "Going to court against them means you'll have to see them regularly," she explained, "and family cases can drag on for months or even years. Are you prepared for that kind of sustained contact?" I wasn't sure I was. The thought of being in the same room with them repeatedly, having to listen to their lies, was exhausting just to contemplate. But the alternative, living in constant fear of their next attack, seemed worse. "Let me think about it," I told her. "I'm visiting my grandmother this weekend. I'll make a decision when I get back." The day before my flight, I received a friend request on social media from my cousin Richard. I hadn't spoken to Richard in years, but we'd been close as kids before my parents had some mysterious falling out with his parents. Hesitantly, I accepted the request, thinking perhaps another family member was reaching out in support. Almost immediately, Richard messaged me asking about my success and investments. Something felt off about his wording. It was too similar to things my parents had said. I did some checking and discovered the account had been created just a week earlier. This wasn't Richard at all. It was a fake account created to gather information about me. I immediately blocked the account and implemented a strict trust no one policy regarding family connections. I warned Tyler to be careful about any messages he might receive that seemed to be from my relatives, as my parents might be creating multiple fake profiles. The next morning, as I was packing for my grandmother's visit, Tyler called me into the living room. He had his laptop open to a community Facebook group from my hometown. "You need to see this," he said grimly. On the screen was a post from my mother, claiming I was withholding a family inheritance that was meant to be shared. According to her post, I had tricked my grandmother into giving me money that was intended for the whole family. The post had dozens of sympathetic comments and shares. "What inheritance?" I asked, bewildered. "I don't have any inheritance. Maybe your grandmother knows what they're talking about," Tyler suggested. I called my grandmother immediately, asking if she knew anything about an inheritance my parents might be referring to. "Oh dear," she sighed. "I was going to discuss this with you in person, but I suppose now is as good a time as any." She explained that years ago, she had set up a small trust fund for me that would become accessible when I turned 25. My parents had discovered its existence somehow and had been trying to get her to change the terms so they could access the money as my guardians, despite the fact that I was an adult. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, wondering if it was enough to explain their renewed interest in me. "About $30,000, she said. "Not a fortune, but enough to help you get started in life. I specifically structured it so only you could access it, not your parents." My upcoming 25th birthday suddenly explained my parents' timing. They had figured out I was about to gain access to the trust and wanted to position themselves to get the money. "Would you be willing to make a statement about this?" I asked. "That the money was always intended for me?" "Of course," she said. "We'll talk more when you get here tomorrow." After hanging up, I felt both clarity and disgust. The graduation visit, the sudden desire to reconnect, the attempts to make me feel guilty. It all made sense now. They had been playing a long game to get to my trust fund money. As I finished packing for my trip, Tyler kept monitoring social media and found more posts from my mother, now claiming I was mentally unstable and unable to manage financial decisions. "They're laying groundwork to challenge your competency," Tyler said. "If they can convince people you're unstable, they might try to get control of the trust legally." The thought chilled me. I called my lawyer again and explained the new information about the trust fund. She advised me to get a notarized statement from my grandmother about her intentions for the money and to collect any evidence of my parents' attempts to access it. The morning of my flight, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. "We know about your trip. Running to grandma won't help. Family money belongs to family." I showed the message to Tyler, who insisted on driving me to the airport and waiting until I was through security. As I boarded the plane, I felt a weird mix of emotions. Fear about what my parents might try next, but also a strange sense of power now that I understood their motivation. For once, I was a step ahead of them. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. And for the first time in my life, I was taking control away from them. As the plane took off, I closed my eyes and tried to focus on what my grandmother had said on the phone. "You're stronger than them. You always have been." Maybe it was true. Maybe understanding the game meant I could finally stop playing it. My flight to my grandmother's was the most peaceful 2 hours I'd had in weeks. No calls, no texts, no way for my parents to mess with me at 30,000 feet. I actually closed my eyes and slept for most of it. When I landed, I half expected to see my parents somehow waiting at the gate, but instead, I just saw my grandmother waving at me with a warm smile. "There's my boy," she said, giving me a real hug, not one of those fake ones my mom had tried recently. We drove to her house in comfortable silence for a while before she spoke again. "I've prepared the guest room for you, and I've already called my lawyer to come by tomorrow morning so we can get everything sorted with that trust." Her house was exactly how I remembered it from my childhood visits. Neat, comfortable, and smelling like cinnamon. We spent that evening catching up, and she pulled out old photo albums I'd never seen before. "Your mother tried to get rid of these," she explained, showing me pictures of myself as a baby. "Said they were cluttering up the house when you were about 3. I kept them safe." Looking at those photos was surreal. There were dozens of pictures of me that I'd never seen, moments of my own childhood that had been hidden from me. In some early ones, my parents actually looked happy holding me. Something had clearly changed. "What happened to them?" I asked. "Were they always like this?" My grandmother sighed. "Your mother was always difficult, but it got worse after your grandfather died when you were 2. The inheritance dispute brought out something ugly in her. Your father just follows her lead." The next morning, her lawyer came by as promised. He was an older man named Joseph, who'd known my grandmother for decades. He explained the trust fund details. It was money my grandfather had set aside for me specifically, with my grandmother as trustee, until I turned 25. "Your parents have tried repeatedly to access this money," Joseph explained. "They've claimed it was for your education, your health care, various emergencies. Your grandmother refused each time because she knew they would keep it for themselves." We spent the morning preparing documents, a notarized statement from my grandmother confirming the trust's purpose, paperwork for me to access the funds on my upcoming birthday, and additional legal protections to prevent any challenges to my competency. "This should protect you," Joseph said as he packed up his briefcase. "But these situations can get ugly. Be prepared." He wasn't wrong. That afternoon, my phone exploded with messages. Somehow my parents had found out I was at my grandmother's and were threatening to come there. My grandmother seemed completely unfazed. "Let them come," she said calmly. "I've already called the sheriff. He's an old friend, and he knows not to let them on the property." Sure enough, the local sheriff stopped by an hour later to check in. He was a friendly guy named named Charles who clearly respected my grandmother. She explained the situation, showed him the restraining order paperwork, and he promised to have deputies keep an eye on the house. "Don't you worry, Linda," he told my grandmother. "No one's gonna bother you or your grandson on my watch." That evening, I felt safe for the first time in months. My grandmother and I sat on her porch watching the sunset, and she told me stories about when I was little, before my parents had cut her out of our lives. Apparently, I used to spend weeks with her during summers when I was very young. "You were such a happy child," she said, "always trying to help me garden. You'd get covered in mud and be so proud of yourself." I couldn't remember any of it. Those memories had been taken from me along with the photos. The peace lasted exactly 2 days. On the third morning of my visit, my grandmother received a call from her neighbor saying there was someone taking pictures of her house from the street. We looked out the window, and sure enough, there was my dad sitting in a rental car with a camera. "That's it," my grandmother said, pulling out her phone. "Charles, they're here." The sheriff arrived in under 10 minutes. From the window, I watched him approach my father's car and have what looked like a heated conversation. My dad eventually drove away, but the message was clear. They knew where I was. That afternoon, my grandmother received a certified letter. It was from my parents' lawyer, claiming she was mentally unfit to manage her financial affairs, and that my parents were seeking a competency hearing to take over as her financial guardians. "Well, that's a new low," she remarked, surprisingly calm as she handed me the letter, trying to declare me incompetent to get to my money. "Aren't you worried?" I asked, horrified at this new attack. "Heavens no," she replied. "I had a complete cognitive assessment done 3 months ago when they first started hinting about my memory problems. My doctor said I have the mental capacity of someone 20 years younger. Joseph has all the documentation." My grandmother was 3 steps ahead of them. She'd anticipated every move. I was in awe of her strategic thinking. "You don't survive 80 years by being naive," she said when I told her this. "And you don't raise a daughter like your mother without learning to protect yourself." The next day was my 25th birthday. Joseph came by again with the final paperwork for me to access the trust fund. It felt strange signing the documents, knowing this money was what had triggered the whole nightmare with my parents. "Once this is processed, the money will be in your account within 48 hours, Joseph explained. "I recommend moving it immediately to an account your parents have no knowledge of." That made sense. I called my bank back home and arranged to open a new account with a different bank. Meanwhile, my grandmother had baked me a birthday cake and bought me a new watch. It was the most normal birthday celebration I'd had in years. "I wish I could have done this for all your birthdays," she said, as we ate cake on the porch. "I tried to send cards, you know, for years. I doubt you ever got them." I hadn't. That night, I checked my email one last time before bed and found a message from Tyler with the subject line, "They showed up again." My parents had appeared at our apartment building with a birthday cake, causing a scene in the lobby when security wouldn't let them up. The card they'd left with the receptionist said something about family money and sharing blessings. The next morning, I accessed my new trust fund for the first time. $30,000. Not a life-changing amount, but enough to make a difference for someone just starting out. My first instinct was to save it for a down payment on a house someday, somewhere with good security. Looking at that account balance, I felt hollow. This was what all the drama had been about. This was why my parents had suddenly reconciled with me after years of emotional abuse. $30,000. That's what my relationship with them was worth. I told my grandmother I needed to go back home earlier than planned. I had made a decision. It was time to end this cycle once and for all. "I understand," she said, "but promise you'll come back to visit. You always have a home here." She drove me to the airport, and we hugged goodbye with real affection. On the flight home, I drafted a comprehensive plan with the help of my lawyer, who I called from the airport. By the time I landed, we had a strategy in place. Tyler picked me up at the airport, looking relieved to see me. "Dude, they've gone completely off the rails since you left. They showed up at my work yesterday asking for your flight information. It ends today," I told him. "I've got a plan." The next morning, my lawyer and I finalized what she called the nuclear option, a formal cease and desist letter outlining every single instance of harassment with evidence attached. But this wasn't just another legal threat. With the letter, we included separate sealed envelopes addressed to my parents' employers, neighbors, church leaders, and friends, containing selected evidence of their behavior. These envelopes would be sent if they contacted me again in any way. "This is the end of the line," my lawyer said as I signed the letter. "They contact you again, these go out, and their carefully constructed social image crumbles." I had the package delivered via certified mail, requiring signature confirmation. Then I waited. Less than 24 hours later, my father called from a new number I didn't recognize. "You think you can threaten us?" he demanded when I answered. "We're your parents. We'll tell everyone what kind of son you really are." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "But before you do, you should know I've already had conversations with your boss at the insurance company and Pastor William at your church. They were very interested in some of the recordings I have." There was silence on the other end. Then, "You're bluffing. Pastor William mentioned he's concerned about the spiritual guidance you might need after hearing about your attempts to defraud your elderly mother, and your boss was particularly interested in the fraudulent police report you sent to my employer." My father's tone changed instantly. For once in my life, I held the power in our relationship. I could hear the panic in his voice as he realized I wasn't the easy target he'd thought. "Look, maybe we all need to calm down," he said. "We can work this out as a family." "There is no we anymore," I replied. "This is the last time we'll speak. If you or mom contact me again, directly or through others, those envelopes get delivered." delivered. End of story. I hung up before he could respond and blocked the number. For 3 whole weeks, there was complete silence from my parents. No calls, no emails, no relatives reaching out on their behalf. Tyler and I started to relax, thinking maybe the threat had actually worked. Then one morning, Tyler found all 4 of his car tires slashed in our apartment parking garage. There were no cameras in that section, so we couldn't prove it was them, but the timing was suspicious. It felt like retaliation. "They're not going to stop," Tyler said as we waited for the tow truck. "They're just going to get more sneaky." He was right. I needed to be proactive instead of reactive. I decided to contact my parents' close social circle directly. I wrote a carefully worded email explaining the situation factually, without emotional accusations, and sent it to their neighbors and church friends whose contacts I could find. The response was immediate, but mixed. My mother took to Facebook posting public prayers for her troubled son and his spiritual journey back to family. The comments were filled with people offering support and promising to pray for me too. She was controlling the narrative again. I was weighing whether to respond publicly when something unexpected happened. 3 people from my parents' social circle reached out to me privately. One was their next-door neighbor, another was a woman from their church, and the third was my dad's co-worker. All 3 shared similar stories of my parents borrowing money that was never repaid, spreading rumors about people who crossed them, and manipulating situations to their advantage. They just weren't willing to say it publicly. "Your mother has dirt on half the church," the woman explained. "Nobody wants to be her next target." My father's sister called me the next day. I was surprised to hear from her, as we hadn't spoken in years. "I saw your email," she said. "I want you to know I believe you." We talked for nearly an hour about my childhood and the recent harassment. She seemed genuinely sympathetic and understanding. Then, about halfway through the call, her tone shifted subtly. "You know, family is all we have in the end," she said. "I think you should consider forgiving them. They're not getting any younger, and that money could really help them with retirement." And there it was. She wasn't calling to support me. She was trying to broker access to the trust fund money. I wondered if she was getting a cut. "I appreciate your concern," I said stiffly, "but forgiveness requires accountability first." "You're holding grudges," she snapped, her friendly demeanor evaporating. "You need to grow up and realize family comes first." I ended the call and blocked her number too. My family circle was getting smaller by the day, but so was my parents' ability to reach me through others. Tyler suggested we take a weekend trip to clear our heads. We booked a cabin a few hours away, hoping some distance would help us decompress. We were only gone for one night when both our phones started buzzing with alerts from our security system. Someone was trying to break into our apartment. We raced back to find our door frame damaged, but the reinforced locks had held. The police took this attempt more seriously, dusting for fingerprints and taking detailed reports. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any clean prints to identify the perpetrator. "This is getting dangerous," the officer told us. "These people are escalating." We hired a professional security company that same day to install a comprehensive system, motion sensors, cameras, 24/7 monitoring, the works. They finished the installation just as a package was delivered to our door. Inside was a family photo album with a note saying, "Remember the good times." As I flipped through it, I noticed something strange. Many of the photos had been altered. There were pictures of birthday parties my parents had never attended, family vacations we'd never taken, holiday gatherings that never happened. They had actually photoshopped themselves into my childhood memories. "This is some next-level gaslighting," Tyler said, looking over my shoulder at the obviously manipulated images. I brought the album to my next therapy session. My therapist examined the photos carefully and helped me process this new manipulation tactic. The session was helpful, but that night, I had intense nightmares about my childhood, distorted memories where I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The next day, I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents. The stories others shared were sadly familiar, and for the first time, I felt truly understood by people who had lived similar experiences. I was starting to heal. 2 sessions later, I looked up during group sharing and froze. My mother was sitting in the back row, wearing sunglasses and a scarf over her hair, but unmistakably her. She had infiltrated my support group, my one safe space. I left immediately, not even grabbing my jacket, and called my therapist from the car. This violation was the final straw. With my lawyer's help, I documented every single harassment incident chronologically. We included the slashed tires, the break-in attempt, the photoshopped album, and my mother stalking me to therapy. The evidence was overwhelming. On my next visit to my grandmother, I brought this documentation with me. She hosted a family meeting where I presented everything. My parents showed up with a woman they introduced as a family counselor, who turned out to be my mother's friend with 0 credentials. I refused to proceed under false pretenses and exposed the fake counselor immediately. The meeting devolved into chaos, with family members taking sides. In the middle of the shouting, my normally soft-spoken grandmother stood up and silenced the room. "I have watched how you treated this boy his entire life," she said directly to my parents. "I saw the bruises on his spirit every time I visited. I tried to intervene, and you cut me out. You will not gaslight this family the way you gaslighted my grandson." My parents stormed out, calling my grandmother a traitor. 2 days later, she called me in tears. My parents had shown up at her house, demanding she change her will and trust arrangements. When she refused, they threatened to have her declared incompetent and put in a nursing home. I drove to her house immediately and found my parents had taken her phone phone and were refusing to leave. When I called the police, they dismissed it as a family dispute. I had to secretly record my father threatening both of us about consequences if we didn't cooperate with the new financial arrangements. That recording finally gave us what we needed for legal protection. A judge granted emergency protective orders for both my grandmother and me. She temporarily moved into my spare bedroom where she would be safe. Having her stay with me was healing in ways I hadn't expected. She filled in gaps in my childhood memories, showing me I hadn't imagined the abuse. My parents had contested the protective orders, but the judge made them permanent after hearing our evidence. With the legal victory and my grandmother's affairs secured, I started to feel closure. Then came the letter from my father's doctor saying he'd had a heart attack and was asking for me. I was suspicious of the timing, but called the hospital directly to verify. My father had indeed been admitted for a minor cardiac event, but was stable. My grandmother's friend who worked there overheard my mother discussing how this health scare could bring him back to his senses, meaning me. I didn't visit, but sent a brief, compassionate note through my lawyer wishing him recovery. My mother responded with angry messages that violated the protective order, which my lawyer documented for the court. The months that followed were quiet. My parents seemed to finally accept the legal boundaries. I occasionally checked their social media through a friend's account and found my mother had joined several estranged parents support groups, still portraying herself as the victim. But they were no longer targeting me directly. I could finally focus on healing and building my life. My grandmother became a regular presence, sharing family stories and photos I'd never seen. Through her, I reconstructed a more accurate picture of my childhood. I realized my parents had always struggled with money and likely saw me as a potential source of support from early on. Understanding this context helped me feel pity for them rather than anger. When I look back at that 6-year-old boy who woke up early to clean the house, desperately hoping for love, I wish I could tell him it wasn't his fault, that some people just aren't capable of giving love the way children need it, that he would eventually build a family of choice that would give him what his family of origin couldn't. The trust fund money sits mostly untouched in my account. I used a small portion to help Tyler with his car repairs and to upgrade my grandmother's security system. The rest is saved for a future down payment, not on a house, but on a duplex where my grandmother can live in one unit and I can live in the other. Family doesn't have to be toxic. Sometimes you just need to redefine what family means.